Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Reign of Troy Radio, episode 443, coming to you on Wednesday, September 7th. We're going to look forward to Saturday night's clash between the USC Trojans and the Stanford Cardinal at Stanford Stadium in Palo Alto. 4:30 p.m. on ABC. It is the number one broadcast team. It's going to be Kirk Herbstreit, and all those guys, and it's going to be a big matchup for USC, the first Pac-12 game of the Lincoln Riley era. As always, you can follow us on Twitter. I'm at MichaelCastFS. Alicia, my co-host, is at Penguin of Troy. Together, Reign of Troy is at Reign of Troy on Twitter. Facebook, facebook.com/Reign of Troy. Our email address is reignoftroy@fansided.com. I'm your host, Michael Castillo, joined along with my co-host here in the Reign of Troy studio, Alicia Deratola.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, I am back. We are back. It is another episode of Reign of Troy Radio. We're going 3 a week right now. Previews, Fallout episodes, and of course, CarCast. You had your first CarCast over the weekend after USC's big win over Rice. How was it?
It was great. I mean, I was kind of giddy. It was a fun game to watch and a fun game to CarCast about. So, yeah, more to come, please.
Yeah, quite the performance for SC, winning 66-14. 66 points, the most Trojans have scored since 2008 when they beat Washington State 69-0. A big number, aided, of course, 3 pick sixes, two of those coming to start the second half and really kill off the game. Alicia, I just want to add my thoughts on the Rice game really quick here, since I wasn't able to do that. You so eloquently had plenty of thoughts. I thought you were great on your 2 solo pods. That's what you're supposed to do to an inferior team, right? Like, case in point, do that. Like, beat them. Make it clear that you are the better team. Take advantage of all the opportunities that you get. It was the perfect week 1 for SC. They surely weren't perfect in every aspect of the game, especially on defense. There were spots where Rice had a lot of success on the ground. I think in the first half they averaged 6 yards a carry. That's not what you want. But at the same time, they were able to make big plays on defense when they needed it. And they made sure that they beat them down and got reps for the second and third teamers. That's what you want. That's what SC hasn't done in recent years. And it was the perfect start for the Lincoln Riley era.
Yeah, how many times have we seen a season opener that even USC had success in that they still only managed to score 30-some-odd points?
Yeah, exactly.
And the opposing team still managed to score, 20-some-odd points. So, yeah, 66-14. The only thing you could have asked for more from would be just that Rice didn't have that success, the successful drives that they did early in the game.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, when your defense comes up with turnovers like that, you got to credit the defense because that's a skill. Not every USC team has had that skill. So certainly, I last year's defense didn't have that skill. I was looking up turnover stats for the over/under, and well, maybe not for the research, but USC was like 8th in the Pac-12, tied for 8th in the Pac-12 with turnovers last year. So that is a really good start against an inferior opponent that USC made look entirely inferior. You can't complain.
Yeah, SC did their job. They did their job, absolutely.
And more than that on offense. They did their job and more than that on offense.
Yeah, I don't want to speak ahead of turn of the over-under stuff, but I was looking up stuff. The 7 third down attempts USC had against Rice, the fewest since going 1 of 6 against Idaho in 2015.
Well, that's a fitting matchup, too, because Idaho is sort of on the level of where this Rice team is. And that's, again, that's what you got to do. That's what you got to do. And USC converted most of those early third downs as well. So all of those early third downs as well, because they didn't have an unsuccessful offensive drive until the second half.
Yeah, and that's what you want to see out of this new look offense for the Trojans under Lincoln Riley. As always, thanks for joining us over on YouTube. If you're watching this live on YouTube, we will be back after the game on Saturday. SC plays Stanford again at 4:30. I think the way we're going to do that, probably expect us to go live about 8:30 ish, probably about 20 minutes, half hour after the game or so. So look for us there after the game on Saturday night for the CarCast. And Alicia, let's just get into the news bit here ahead of USC and Stanford. Not much news because USC and Lincoln Riley are keeping things close to the vest. That is what college football is these days. Injury news is not going to be reported on, whether it be from the team or from the outside. There was a little bit of injury observation, if you want to call it that, from Tuesday's practice, but Lincoln Riley pretty much shut it down that there's not much to gain from that. I mean, to take away from that, even though it was seen that Raleek Brown was wrapped up with his ankle and moving around okay, but that was reported. But beyond that, Lincoln Riley had no new information.
Yeah, and that media blackout is going to mean that the people at practice can't even report like that a player like Raleek Brown was suited up for that practice. I mean, we can still sort of add on that we can still comment on that because it's out there in the universe. And that's a really good thing, just that Raleek Brown was there at practice and practicing. So I that great news on Raleek. I was worried that it was going to be like the kind of sprain that was going to have him out for a few weeks. And this is clear. Like, to me, it's clear if he has his ankle wrapped up and is practicing, this was a very, very low grade sprain, or it was more like an ankle twist or a tweak or something like that. So you couldn't be more happy. I would prefer that USC not need to use Raleek Brown a ton against Stanford. If you can protect him physically in that game, then that's great. But he is a weapon, and if you need him to have him available against Stanford, theoretically, is a huge plus.
Yeah, Raleek was a huge, piece of the game on Saturday against Rice. You look at everything that he put together. 36 rushing yards, but really it was about what he could do with the ball in his hands, all told. Receiving, he was 2 for 40, so that's 76 total all-purpose yards. He did everything that you wanted to see from a freshman. We talked about it last week in our preview. Could he sort of have that Stephen Carr breakout game like we saw against Western Michigan? How do you think it compares? I think it's not quite the same, in which he didn't have the yardage and the 2 touchdowns like Stephen Carr had, but popped a Heisman pose. That's something.
I mean, he impressed the way that Stephen Carr did.
Yeah.
Even though he didn't, I think Stephen Carr broke a couple of long touchdowns actually. So even though he didn't have those kind of plays, I think that you could just see there's something about a player that stands out even in that moment. We saw it with Ronald Jones. We saw it with Stephen Carr. And obviously Stephen Carr's career didn't go the way that Ronald Jones' career did, and that was unfortunate. But there's something else. And that was just visibly obvious, even if the production wasn't at the same level as a Carr Rojo like debut performance. The same vibe was still there for sure.
Yeah, I was listening to the game while driving, essentially on the Oregon Trail, I-84, 82, whatever it is, going through rural Idaho and listening to Pete Arbogast. And he was talking a lot about making the comparison to Adoree Jackson. And yeah, I think there's elements of that when you see that he can do things on both sides of the offense in terms of the run game and the pass game. So it'll be interesting to see what he can do this week if he's able to play. We'll see that more going forward on Saturday. Dejon Benton also left the game Saturday, had a wrist injury, shouldn't be out long. Again, that's about all we have in terms of injury news at all, because SC has sort of put a blackout on that kind of stuff, reporting from practice or otherwise. So one of the things you wanted to bring up, Alicia, to continue on the running back front is Travis Dye. He had a hell of a quote Tuesday after practice, no blocky, no rocky. You loved that, didn't you?
I absolutely love it. I want it to get put on t-shirts by somebody. Travis Dye should get a t-shirt deal with some NIL crew to sell t-shirts that say no blocky, no rocky. I absolutely love it, especially knowing what Travis Dye did in that game. It was more like, I think coming out of the game in the CarCaster talked about that big block that he had just in pass protection for Caleb Williams, where he basically pancaked a dude, and it was just awesome to see from a running back. But there was a tweet going around later in the weekend of Travis sort of swinging out of the backfield and just sort of like joining in a block that an offensive lineman was engaged in, and the guy just goes flying, and the offensive lineman is able to pancake him, and Travis Dye continues on his route and catches a pass and continues on and gets the yardage. So that was beautiful as well, because you can imagine other running backs just doing okay, I'm supposed to just sort of like give this guy a little shove as I'm going, but like Travis just no prisoners, man. This man makes no prisoners. Josh Arena said Travis Dye made a rice cake out of that guy. Yes, yes, that's exactly what he did. That's beautiful. And to hear that mindset from Travis Dye, no blocky, no rocky, not only is it a catchy phrase, but it speaks to the mentality that he brings. I mean, there were some other quotes from him talking about Caleb Williams and how he can do everything, like walk your dog and wash your car and do all that kind of, like, he just seems like a cool guy. I'm not surprised that he seems to have fit in so well in the USC locker room so quickly. He, to me, should quickly become a fan favorite, and that just more of that. There might be a no blocking, no rocky themed over under pick later on today.
We can't spoil all the over.
I know we're doing it, but yeah.
The interesting thing is, I thought that he could kind of fit the role of Vi Malepeai, but probably like he's Vi 2.0.
Yeah.
And then he starts saying these things and really winning your heart with all this. And so I think that's confirmed. He's Vi was your guy, and now it's Travis Dye.
Travis, my guy Dye.
From Vi to Guy.
My guy Vi. I went from Vi to Die.
Vi to Die. Yeah.
My guy Vi is now my guy Ty. My guy Die.
Say that 10 times.
My guy Die. My guy Die. Yeah, love it.
Yeah. Other news. Last thing before we get into talking about SC and Stanford. SC has lost the commitment. The 4-star safety Braxton Myers out of Capel, Texas. Not completely a shock when you look at the crystal ball stuff over on 24/7 Sports. Plenty of crystal balls came in a couple months ago, or last month, August, from Steve Wiltfong, Greg Biggins, David Johnson from Inside the Rebels. This is going to be a dogfight between SC and Ole Miss, with Ole Miss certainly getting the lead right now, even though Myers is uncommitted from anyone, having decommitted from the Trojans today. Your thoughts?
This is a prime example of why commitments early on in the cycle are good, but they don't necessarily mean too much, because there's just so much ground to cover for everybody in the recruiting game. USC could end up getting him back, but also USC could lose him to Ole Miss for a million reasons. And that's just the way that recruiting goes. Particularly, that'll be highlighted in the NIL era, but also when you're dealing with a situation where not only do recruits change their minds or get different feelings from different programs one way or the other, coaching staffs change their minds, start recruiting one guy over the other. Families can put pressure on one way or the other. There's just so much that goes on. Until a guy signs, you can't really count those chickens.
Yeah, we will see. Plenty of time until signing day, which is December, and then obviously February after that. Alicia, let's start talking about Saturday's game, 4:30, USC and Stanford. It is the rivalry renewed after a year off from COVID last year, and then, 2 years ago, and then SC played Stanford last year to no avail.
Yeah, I wanted to forget about that game too, Michael.
No, mostly I was thinking like this is the first time SC's been up at the farm in 4 years. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
it's been a while.
It's unheard of in this rivalry. SC has not been up to Palo Alto since 2018 when JT Daniels was the quarterback. It's been a really long time. And Stanford is a team who struggled mightily last year. They went 3-9, very not good. However, they had a couple of big wins, one over SC that ultimately was the end of the Clay Helton era, and then a win over the Oregon Ducks. What is it with David Shaw getting these wins in big games? I saw a comment in here over on YouTube from Donnell Smith that said that Michael thinks highly of Stanford, and nobody knows why. And I don't think highly of Stanford. I think high of David Shaw's ability to win games he has no business winning. And so in our game preview or our season preview, I picked Stanford to beat USC. And I think these next 20, 30 minutes are going to be a exercise in trying to figure out, will I continue with that prediction after week one? I don't know at this point. You look at it, SC beats Rice 66-14. Stanford has a drubbing of Colgate. And Rice and Colgate, two things that when you think about them, you don't think about college football. So
true. Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Initial thoughts about Stanford going into week 2?
I wish they hadn't played Colgate. Now they could have played Northwestern at Northwestern, and we would then be underestimating them as usual. But I just wish it wasn't Colgate, because we can't get a sense of where this team really is. And last year they were very bad. They were very bad, but they beat USC handily. So again, it's I think that's the biggest issue with evaluating the Stanford team. They weren't good last year. They return a lot of the guys from last year. Theoretically, you get better, but this isn't EA Sports. You don't get experience points that automatically make you better just because you're returning for another year. So it's just very difficult to say anything about what Stanford will be this year. I mean, it's difficult to speak on USC and what the Rice game meant, but even less so, because at least USC had a trillion transfers, and you can point specifically to coaching changes and transfers that really are going to impact the way that the team trajectory goes. With Stanford, they have a couple transfers that could make a difference, but they also had guys transfer out that were very important to them last year, even though the team was not good at all. So it's difficult. I would rather not play Stanford in week 2 for this exact reason, but this is why USC plays Stanford in week 2, and this is why it's always a difficult matchup for us to evaluate.
Yeah, I think there's a different team that plays SC in Oregon from Stanford versus any other Stanford team. Stanford against UCLA, the same thing. Stanford has this hex on the Bruins.
There's just something.
I don't know what it is, but those three teams, David Shaw just has this ability to continuously get the best of. And part of it for USC has been poor coaching, right? Like SC has been poorly coached. I don't know that you can say that about Oregon over the last decade. Some years better than not, what not, and plenty of criticisms about Cristobal and all that, but there were proven teams that Oregon has had, and Stanford has somehow beaten them. And SC, when you least expect it to lose to Stanford, Stanford sort of does it. One of the stats I wanted to pull up, and I'm kicking myself I didn't pull up before this game, is Stanford as an underdog against SC and Oregon the last decade. I want to say that they have a winning record. Seriously, that's why. All of anything that I say is clouded strictly in that. It has nothing to do with my faith in Stanford as a football team in 2022, because I don't have faith in Stanford. They were 3-9 last year. I'm not going to say that they struggled against Colgate. It's Colgate. It's week 1. It's whatever. But that was a game in which they led the game 28-10 in the third quarter, and I don't think that's not overly impressive against Colgate. This isn't the Colgate of the 1930s, that was winning national championships. So I don't know. Let's talk about the Stanford offense and what happens with them when they have the ball going up against USC's defense. Of course, led by quarterback Tanner McKee and our Colonel Centennial. He had the 2 years off to take a Mormon mission. He is back. It feels like he's been at Stanford forever, but this is only year 3 for him. Preseason All Pac-12 honorable mention. Last year was a big year for him. 2,300 yards through the air, 15 TDs, 7 interceptions as he really solidified the starting job for Stanford at quarterback. This is not the Stanford of old. They are not a pound it running football team that's going to run power over and over and over again. And this is why I think there's been a lot of talk about how Rice and Stanford had a lot of comparables. Rice coached by Mike Bloomgren, the former Stanford assistant under David Shaw. He's the one who coined intellectual brutality, which is a mindset that Stanford continues to this day. However, Stanford over the last 4 or 5 years has really essentially developed into an air raid team. Maybe not air raid team in the sense of like a Mike Leach air raid, but like a David Shaw air raid of this is going to be a pass heavy pro attack in which they're going to want to throw the football a lot. We saw it back when they had AJ Costello throw into JJ Arcega-Whiteside. This is a pass focused team. They are not the running focused team. So I would take away everything you think of as Rice as a precursor to this and take that out of it. This is the team who, against Colgate last week, a team in which they could have probably run the ball on every play and still won the game, threw the ball most of the time.
Yeah, and that's something that we have to continue to remember is Stanford has transitioned away from their sort of traditional David Shaw and even going back to Harbaugh, what the way that they approach things. The offense has changed and even the defense has changed formationally. So that's another element of the unknown is how will they come into this and does that bode poorly for USC when the secondary was the area that felt the most vulnerable against Rice? And obviously they got the interceptions, but Tanner McKee is a significantly better quarterback than either of Rice's quarterbacks. And I think that's where the matchup for me really gets highlighted is if Tanner McKee can get going, USC is going to have some problems. It's what happened last year. Tanner McKee just went off and he is capable of doing that. And he's got a receiving core that is significantly better than the receiving core that Rice brought to the field. I do not expect them to drop those 4 passes the way that they did and set up interceptions the way that they did. So it'll just be much more of a challenge for this USC defense and a secondary that is still very much trying to get themselves together. And I think that when we talk about USC being vulnerable to Stanford, that's what we're talking about. Now, on the flip side, statistically, Stanford's passing offense wasn't that great last year, except for when they played USC.
Yeah, so they were world class in that game. Yeah,
yeah. So let's go through some of these numbers. 113th is all last year's numbers because if you look at the stats for this year, it just includes the Colgate game, and we're not paying attention to that.
Yeah.
So 2021 offensive stats: 113th in scoring offense, 20.4 points per game. 122nd in total offense, 101st in yards per play, 126th in rushing offense, 117th in rushing yards per carry. That's 3.21 rushing yards per carry. 81st in passing offense. So that was their strength, to be sure, but still 81st and 82nd in passer rating, which really is a reflection of the way that Tanner McKee had a very strong first half of the season, and then things just went very wrong for him.
Yeah.
And he did miss 2 games. So, things obviously didn't go super great for them at the second half of the season, but he really fell off a cliff in the second half of the season, and that hurt a lot of these numbers. So more things to take into account. There's some Jekyll and Hyde going on with this Stanford team as well, as obviously evidenced by being able to beat USC and Oregon, but losing to everybody else.
Yeah, and to me, it's not that they beat SC last year. It's the way they did it. The way they beat SC last year.
Yeah.
SC got drubbed by 3 straight teams at home.
Yeah. In identical ways.
In identical ways, but I think we both agree Oregon State and Utah are good football teams.
Yeah.
Utah especially. Stanford not so much last year. So
No.
like, why were they able to drub SC in the same way, and particularly through the air, where Oregon State and Utah kind of did it on the ground. So kind of a different way in that sense, but still got the same production out of it. And you talk about Tanner McKee kind of falling off in the second half. The interesting thing is you look at his numbers. Even when he was good, Stanford was struggling last year.
Well,
you look at the Notre Dame loss. I'm just going to read off some stats to you and then tell me, what do you think a score would be in which a quarterback had these numbers? 20 of 25, 80% completion percentage, a touchdown, no picks, and a passer rating of 150.99. What do you think the 172 yards of passing yards? What do you think the score would be in that game if that was one team's quarterback numbers?
You'd think it would be low. There's some efficiency there, but that's not enough yardage to have been moving down the field.
It's not enough yardage, but you would think that maybe it's a close game.
Yeah.
Right?
Low scoring.
They lost 45-14 in that game.
Yeesh.
So even when Tanner McKee was on, they just still weren't doing anything.
Yes.
Why is that? That's a problem.
Why is that?
Because they weren't able to run the ball either.
Because they couldn't run the ball, and they couldn't protect McKee. They were 11th in sacks allowed last year. So the offensive line, which returns all 5 starters, by the way, was like the worst Stanford offensive line that there's ever been. It's certainly in this era of Stanford, which is, again, one of those interesting questions. They returned all 5 starters. Is that a good thing for them if those starters were bad last year? That is the question. This is why I think so much of this game comes down to the matchup in the trenches, in the sense that we already know that if Tanner McKee has pressure on him, he gets in trouble. If he doesn't, he can tear you up. Well, guess what happened?
Against Stanford. They didn't get pressure on him last year.
How many sacks did they have against Stanford?
None. SC
0.
Couldn't get a sack until like week 8 last year.
Yes. So
then you look at the Rice game, and again, I am throwing out the Colgate game, and I think that for a lot of ways you can throw out the Rice game too. I'm not going to sit here and split hairs between Rice and Colgate.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you look at the Rice game and what SC did on defense. It was about the pressure and the 4 interceptions that they got in that game. So many of those came from pressure, right? They weren't necessarily clean plays in which a defender made a great play that jumped out of nowhere and snatched the ball from the receiver. No, they were plays that ended up breaking down because of the pressure. There was a tip ball because a pass was forced. Wiley Green forced to throw against his body and on 4th down. Like, those were the kind of things that you ended up seeing in this game, in that game last week. And those are the things that you're going to want to do to Tanner McKee this week.
It's going to be a huge game for the likes of Tuli Tuipulotu, Corey Foreman, Romello Height, Nick Figueroa. USC needs these guys to show up consistently. If that happens, if USC is getting consistent pressure, I think USC rolls in this game. If that doesn't happen, then this could end up being something akin to a shootout, because the matchup to watch is absolutely what goes on with the offensive line. Stanford has playmakers. I like the look of EJ Smith. He looks like he has breakaway ability. Tanner McKee, we've seen what he can do when he's comfortable. They have Elijah Higgins, who was a preseason All-Pac-12 honorable mention. Michael Wilson is back. He was only able to play 4 games last year. Their leading receiver from last year.
2 TDs last week.
2 TDs against Colgate.
Again, it's Colgate.
It's Colgate, but still 2 TDs say that they're targeting him, right?
Right.
And then tight end Benjamin Urasek, who was the leading receiver for them last year and is preseason All-Pac-12 second teamer, is back as well. So a lot of the weapons are back. They can do damage, but it all comes, can the ball get out of Tanner McKee's hands quickly or without being disrupted? And that's why, key players. Gary Lewis brings up Eric Gentry. I agree too. When USC sends blitzes, when the linebackers are sent on blitzes, they have to get home more often and more consistently. And that's going to be the thing that determines the sort of way this game plays out. Because I think the only way Stanford wins this game is if they outscore USC.
Yeah, 100%. I mean,
obviously,
obviously, but no.
When I say outscore USC, I mean like they win a shootout.
Right. Yeah, and that is the way for Stanford to win this game. And how are you going to do that? You're going to have to sustain your drives. You're going to have to get the most out of your drives. And I'm sure that they saw a lot of film early on in the game of the Rice game and kind of liked what they saw with SC giving up plays on the ground and those sort of things. But again, I don't know that it completely translates because Rice's game plan is significantly different than Stanford. So I don't know. I mean, if Rice goes, I mean, Stanford goes back to wanting to run the ball and establish the run more than anything. Maybe you see them go and try to do the things that Rice did with power runs and all that and try to force SC to correct the mistakes that they had from early on in the game last week.
Which they might try to do because it would seem to me that the way to stop this USC offense is to keep them off the field.
Yeah. No, that could, sure. That could be the thing where they try to replicate Rice's first three drives, sure. But again, it kind of counterproductive to what they were last year. So
yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. The thing about David Shaw is you end up seeing what you don't expect in week 2.
Well, and that's the other thing is them playing Colgate meant like it's entirely possible it was only 28-10 against Colgate because they literally did not prepare for Colgate. They might have spent this entire summer preparing for Lincoln Riley.
I've said it since December. David Shaw is spending the next 9 months getting ready for SC to make a statement. So let's flip it over and talk about USC's offense against the Stanford defense. The Trojans were incredible last week. Again, it was Rice's defense couldn't stop anything last year or last week. And SC made him pay. Didn't have necessarily the total yardage output that you would have liked, but that was helped by 4 interceptions and a bunch of short fields, including 3 pick sixes in which they didn't have to score on offense themselves. 45 offensive points attributed to the Trojans. And you look at Caleb Williams, he was just about perfect. Everything you wanted to see last week, he did. The running game and the passing game both worked. Everything was distributed. There wasn't one guy who kind of stepped above everybody. Kind of what we had talked about, that they were going to spread the ball around a lot in the running and the passing game. And you saw that. Taj Washington was the leading receiver, but there wasn't one guy with 100 yards. This was a completely different USC attack than you've seen before. And that was a breath of fresh air, right? Like, this is what you want to see out of the Lincoln Riley offense. When you consider that Stanford's defense last year was 106th in scoring, 114th in total defense, 115th in yards per play, 127th in rush defense, is there any reason to think that they could stop SC in week 2?
So on the last episode, I read a long message from Marcelo where he was begging us to let go of our trauma related to Stanford and to just let it go and move on and not be afraid of them. And defense is absolutely where I admit I am driven purely only by trauma, because Stanford's defense is doo-doo sauce. And even looking back at last year, the drubbing that USC got, the one thing that I think is easy for me to recall is that USC's defense could not stop Stanford's offense, but USC's offense was shooting themselves in the foot so often that it didn't even matter that they couldn't keep up. Like, that was USC masterclass in terms of shooting themselves in the foot in the Clay Helton era. Absolutely. So now you look ahead to this matchup. And I think during the offseason, when I was highlighting Stanford as like a danger spot for USC in week 2, aside from knowing the offensive weapons that they have, it was very much trauma driving my Stanford always has a formidable defense. But that is flat out untrue. This defense is, as Josh Arena just put in the chat, all caps, doo-doo sauce. There's only one player on this defense that is free of that sort of stain on him, and it's Kaya Blue Kelly, the cornerback, who is all Pac-12 first team in the preseason. He led the team with 10 pass breakups, 2 interceptions. He is a legitimate cornerback. Stanford has produced legitimate cornerbacks over the past few years. He is the next in that line. He will be able to give a challenge to whichever wide receiver that he is matched up with, be it Jordan Addison or Mario Williams or whoever else. The problem is, you need more than one shutdown corner to take care of this defense. You need a secondary that is loaded to deal with this defense, to deal with this offense. And they get Oklahoma safety Patrick Fields, who's a 3-year starter, who will solidify some of what they're doing in that secondary. But to me, it's just not enough. There's just not enough to make me believe that Stanford has any hope of stopping Caleb Williams in this attack, especially when their running defense is so horrendous. They gave up 5.74 yards per carry last year. And guess what? They lost 2 of their best defensive linemen in Thomas Booker and Dalen Wade-Perry. So I can't even like imagine that they're going to be able to do a ton to limit USC on the ground either. This is a horrendous matchup for Stanford. I think David Shaw might be able to prepare 3 years to face this USC team and still not be able to slow down this USC offense. I'm saying it now. The only way that USC doesn't put up a bucket load of points on this Stanford defense is if they revert back to the Clay Helton coach team that shot themselves in the foot on offense all the damn time. And I'm sorry, I'm not ready to say that Lincoln Riley's offense is capable of doing that yet. I think that at most you're going to have maybe a couple dumb turnovers that go your way and stop you from scoring 50 points. That's the only way you don't score 50 points. I'm not trying to like get ahead of myself, but do you see anything about this defense that scares you?
No. I think there's layers here, though. No, absolutely, and I think that there is no reason to think that Stanford is going to stop SC throughout the game, right? None. And the only holdup that I have is, don't assume that because SC scored on just about every drive against Rice that they're going to score on every drive against everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's overly presumptuous. However, Stanford is really bad on defense last year, and SC looks very good. And so, yes, I think that SC should walk to being able to score 40 points against this team. If given how effortlessly they moved the ball last week against Rice. Again, it was Rice. I don't want to put too much eggs in that basket and overthink what the Rice game was. But no, I don't think there's any reason to think that Stanford can stop them. I think for me, it comes down to, if Stanford wins this game, it's one of two things. It's one, they can move the ball efficiently on USC's defense, catching SC off guard, in the sense that this is a USC defense that is surely not a finished product under Alex Grinch, because how could they be? It's week 2, and this is a transition year. It's year 1 under the new system, under Lincoln Riley and all that stuff, but also getting SC in week 2, a week 2 hangover of year 1 as well. Because again, this is an early road test and all those things. I wouldn't necessarily bank on that from happening, but when you put the two things together, I think it wouldn't be a surprise if one side of the ball not necessarily failed, but struggled at some point, just because you can't expect both sides of the ball to be infallible on every single drive against every single opponent, right?
Yeah.
Stanford isn't Rice in that sense. So, no, I look at this. This is a terrible matchup, like you mentioned. USC, as long as they continue to have the balance that they have, that makes it really difficult to defend because if you're able to run the ball with Dye and Brown and all those guys and throw the ball to Addison and all those different receivers, where do you start to defend this team? I don't know. And the offensive line being a veteran offensive line that the Trojans have too, it makes it difficult. I don't know. I almost want to see what happens when SC offense struggles to know what was the reason. What were those causes, right? Like,
Yeah.
because at this point I can't picture it, given that we've only seen a very small sample size.
Yeah, Robert Araki asked, "Do you guys think Stanford can win a shootout type game versus USC?" I don't think they can. I think
Well, if they win this game, it has to be a shootout.
But it is a very particular kind of shootout. It's not a 55-56 shootout. It's a sort of 34-35 situation where their offense has dominated time of possession so that they've limited the possessions that USC's offense will have.
Mhm.
And then USC's offense has some costly turnovers. I feel like if you told me that Stanford beat USC and there wasn't a defensive touchdown or a special teams touchdown involved in that, then I think that that would be the only way it would be believable to me. I think that you have to have a situation where just something goes terribly wrong. See what happened at the end of LSU Florida State. A muffed punt, a very stupid pitch at the goal line, something like that just makes things go wrong for you. And that's the only reason that Stanford stays in this, and then they get lucky at some point. So limit USC's offensive touches and get very lucky or generate something. But like even like I wrote down here, the great equalizer could be turnovers. But Stanford was 11th in turnovers gained in the Pac-12 last year. They only had 9 all season. USC was 8th in the Pac-12 in turnovers last year, turnovers gained, which is not good. But they had 10 more than Stanford did. So I mean, it's a big difference. It's a big difference. Like it would
when neither team played in a bowl game.
Yeah, it would be an incredible turnaround for Stanford to produce the kind of turnovers that they need, which leads me to say again, special teams is the great equalizer then, and we don't know what USC special teams is going to look like this year. So if you told me what does it take for Stanford to win this game, things have to go real wrong for USC on special teams, and Caleb Williams will not have the ball in his hands as often as he needs to.
All right, let's go to over under and play our favorite game of over under. Alicia, let's start with you. What do you got? What's your first over under of the week? USC and Stanford.
All right, this one sort of worked itself out really, really nicely in terms of stats for picking this. I'm going 145.5 rushing yards for Stanford. It's a really nice choice because USC allowed 146 rushing yards to Rice. And last year, they gave up 141 rushing yards to Stanford. That was actually Stanford's second best rushing game of the season. They had 200 plus against Vanderbilt. But USC's rush defense has not been great. There were clearly cracks against Rice. So is USC going to make Stanford look like the bad rushing team that they are? Or will Stanford be able to move the ball on offense and on the ground?
I am going to take the under here. I wouldn't be surprised if Stanford had maybe a little smidge of success based on the Rice stuff. Force USC to show that they've adapted and can cover power and all those things. At the same point, that's not what Stanford wants to do this year. That's not what Stanford wants to do last year or the year before. They want to throw the football and get those backs involved in the passing game as well. So I think if Stanford has success, it's going to be through the air, and if Stanford doesn't have success, it's going to be because they can't run either. So yeah, this is a easy under pick for me.
All right, what do you got?
My first one, over under 68.5 rushing yards for USC quarterback Caleb Williams. He had 68 last week against Rice in week 1. His career high is 88 against Texas last year, only on 4 carries. He's been in the 60s on several occasions. That's kind of his sweet spot. 60 against Western Carolina last year, 66 against TCU, 63 at Kansas, 67 against Iowa State, 68, of course, last week against Rice. 68.5 is the line. Can he top that against Stanford? Of the running quarterbacks that Stanford played last year, the only one to do it was Jaden Daniels, who had 76 yards. What do you got?
I'm going to go with the under on that one. That's
Okay.
a lot of rushing yards for a quarterback, even though he obviously had that really nice total against Rice. I think he absolutely could get there if things just play out the way that they potentially could, where, Stanford doesn't get great pressure, but they flush Caleb out of the pocket, and then he just goes to town downfield. But I think it's just more likely for it to be under, and like you're looking at that sort of like 35 to 45 kind of range for me to what I would expect from Caleb in any game this year. The fact that Jaden Daniels was the one that topped this and still not quite, and still just slightly over 68 is to me a reflection of Jaden Daniels and how basically the only thing he has in his locker is to run.
Yeah. I mean, DTR had 30 carries or 30 yards. But the other thing is sacks are involved in this too.
Yeah.
And so that probably played a role for a lot of those guys last year. So under is your pick, which locks me into the over on Caleb Williams rushing yards. What's your next over-under pick?
All right, here it is. I got 1.5 Travis Dye, no blocky, no rocky moments. I would credit him with 2 no blocky, no rocky moments against Rice. The devastating pass block that he had to keep Caleb Williams clean, and then the setting. He basically assisted a pancake on a pass that he caught as well. So I think we all know what a no blocky, no rocky moment looks like, and I'm setting it at 1.5. Do you think he can match his 2 from Rice or above?
I kind of expect Travis Dye to get more run in week 2 because I think week 1 was about getting everyone involved, and maybe I'm just assuming too much, but I feel like Dye is running back 1. And at that point, he's going to get more of the load in week 2. Having said that, I think predicting 2 is a lot on one of these kind of things. So give me 1 or give me the under, which will be under 1.5. No blocky, no rocky moments, just because even if you have a great block, I don't know that becomes a no blocky, no rocky moment, in that a lot of those things are unseen until someone breaks down the game a week later or whatnot.
And I think that's the key thing about a no blocking, no rocky is people are talking about it like either immediately or on replay, or like it gets highlighted at some point.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
My next over-under is 0.5 Tanner McKee interceptions. I struggle to put this line at 0.5 or 1.5, and I'll tell you why, because the Trojans intercepted Rice 4 times last week, including 3 pick sixes, but Tanner McKee had 2 touchdowns and 1 interception last week against Colgate, which might look like he's prone to throwing interceptions, but last year in 10 games, he only had interceptions in 3 of them. They kind of came in bunches, 3 at ASU, 2 against UW, and 2 against Cal. Does he throw an interception against USC on Saturday? 0.5 Tanner McKee interceptions is the line.
Interceptions are tricky. This secondary took advantage of tipped balls a lot. We have a listener over under later that's going to hit on that. And I think my answer to that one is going to inform my answer to this one. I'm going to go with over. I don't know that it'll be like 2, but I do have a decent feeling that USC will have a disruptive player too, that we've seen now that the guys in the secondary are in the right position. So I'll go over on that.
Yeah, I probably should have put the line at 1.5, but it's a little too late.
Yeah, but 1.5. Well, I guess because they do come in bunches, but predicting two turnovers in any game is tough.
Yeah, for sure. Next one, your last one. What do you got?
All right, I got 0.5 sacks for Corey Foreman. In my notes here, I have Stanford's offensive line is bad.
No more detail than that.
No more detail than that. They're bad. They gave up a ton of sacks last year. I already mentioned that. Corey Foreman is an extremely athletic player who was making mincemeat out of the right tackle that he faced against Rice. So I think he has potential to go ham in this game. But my big criticism of Corey is I think he can tighten up his technique sometimes and decision making. I think that he needs to take some better angles at times. He needs some help from the rest of the defensive line to make sure that the quarterback can't run away from him when he does get through. So I don't know that I'm like 100% sold on Corey Foreman being like the sack guy now, but this could be the game for him to feast.
I'm taking the over strictly for one reason. Romello Height got ejected last game.
He doesn't have to sit out though. It was a first half ejection.
It was the first half?
Yeah.
I thought
it was just before halftime.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, good correction.
Yeah.
I was going to say that could end up playing into playing time. Well,
yeah.
Either way, I thought Foreman was better than Height last week too. And so, yeah, I'm going to take the over. I think he's able to get to McKee at least once. Stanford was sort of middle of the road in terms of sack stuff last year as an offensive line, but they weren't a good offensive line in general, as we talked about it. So give me the over, which means that Foreman does get a sack. Last one for me to set for you. Over under 11.5 third down attempts for USC. As I mentioned earlier, the Trojans had 7 third down attempts against Rice. No team in America last week had fewer in week 1. The Trojans are the only team to have 7 or fewer against an FBS team. Miami, who also had 7, played Bethune-Cookman, an HBCU team that plays an FCS. Last year, Oklahoma averaged 11.3 third down attempts per game. And of the FBS teams that played 13 games, only K-State and Coastal Carolina had fewer. 11.5 is the line for USC this week against Stanford. Third down attempts. What do you got?
That's tough. A
lot of things play into this.
There's so many things.
Number of possessions. If you're really good, you're not necessarily going to face third downs.
Whether or not you're running the game, running more often or passing more often.
A lot of things, yeah.
Whether or not you're scoring on big plays. I'm gonna go with
11.5 third down attempts.
I'm gonna go over.
Okay.
I think that the growing pains will come. Also, if there aren't growing pains and USC just blows them out, we're gonna see a fourth quarter with Miller Moss and backups in. They're more likely to end up with third down attempts that might boost this number up. So, like the starting offense could end up with 8, 9 or so, and then you get a few third downs from late on in the game. So, yeah, I'll go over. I'm very curious to see the outcome of this one in particular.
Yeah, me too. I think it's going to be fascinating to see what all comes of it. Last over under we got from Gary Lewis here in the chat on YouTube. 1.5 passes batted down by USC middle linebacker Eric Gentry. What do you got?
Yeah, so Gary didn't give a number. I decided to go with 1.5 on this because he said he was certain that Eric would get at least one. So I'm going to set that line at, if we're confident that he's going to get at least one, will he get 2 instead? I am going to go with over on this because
Okay.
I think that would just be fun.
So what are you constituting a pass batted down?
A pass. Let's go with pass breakup. One where he gets his hand on a pass. I would say if he gets his hand
does
on
it
a
have
pass.
to be noted as a pass breakup in the stat book? Because he had 0 last week in the stat book. SC only had 2 as a team. Shane Lee had 1, and Mekhi Blackman had 1. Because I'm going to take under because these things never get noted down in stat books.
Yeah. Okay. I think we default to stat book unless we clearly see it happen twice and we both take a note.
No,
that's
fair.
happened twice, regardless of what the
that is fair. All right, let's get to our game predictions. Alicia, Bill Connolly's numbers, and again, our little weekly pretext of Bill Connolly's numbers have no idea what to do with USC.
I swear, Bill Connolly's numbers, I love SP Plus. I think it's a very valuable service, but I think Bill C would even tell you.
He has. He's mentioned that this is not the year to use his numbers to talk about USC.
Well, not yet, because eventually his numbers use,
I think it's usually by week 7.
Yeah, by week 7, there is no more 2021 input in anymore. It's all 2022. So until week 7, I think you disregard SP Plus. No offense, Bill Connolly, we love you. But I think the numbers can't really speak to what is real here because,
because there's too much roster turnover and all that. Anyways, his numbers say SC 34-25 over the Stanford Cardinal. The Vegas line as of today when we put together this rundown has the Trojans by 8. Alicia, what is your game prediction?
I'm going with USC 40, Stanford 25. I think USC will break through for a couple. Stanford will break through for a couple scores. I think EJ Smith will have a long touchdown. I think Tanner McKee will have a couple of nice big throws. But in the end, USC will not have an issue with this Stanford defense and win by a solid 15-point margin. And that's just because I think that there are bound to be 1 or 2 mistakes that just happen that stop them from scoring 50.
Okay. You guys know I picked Stanford to beat USC in the preseason ranking. I mean, preseason game predictions and all that. In a vacuum, there is no reason to pick Stanford to beat SC.
Would you say there's no football reason?
I would say there's no football reason to say that Stanford should beat SC this week. Here's the argument. It's David Shaw. David Shaw does weird things against teams that he has no business winning against. The SC teams in which Stanford has been heavy underdogs, he somehow gets wins. Yes, that's against Clay Helton. We can talk all day about that. You all know that. But he does it against Oregon too. And he's done it against UCLA. And he's done it against other Washington. He's had upset wins against he does this all the time. And it makes no sense because Stanford has been terrible in just about any other game. For some reason, in the big games, Stanford comes up to play. You combine this with it's week 2 of year 1. There is a lot of things that is new. I think that as good as SC looked at last week against Rice, it's still a new operation. Things are still in progress. The defense, as you saw last week, not a finished product. They got 4 picks, and they made the most of a really bad team, and you'd love to see that, and that says everything about what this team has not done in the past. But it's still a not finished product, and that's okay. It's year 1, and it's week 1. That's what it was supposed to be. And you look at what Oklahoma has done in early season tests of late. Oklahoma's had plenty of early season tests of late. Last year, week 3 against Nebraska, they won 23-16. A Nebraska team that was garbage. They won by a touchdown. A week later, a West Virginia team that's not very good, they won 16-13 at home. The COVID season, week 2, their first game against an FBS team, Kansas State, at home, they lose 38-35. 2019. Let's see. 2019, pretty good. No issues in 2019. 2018. Week 3 at Iowa State, they win 37-27. They needed OT to play Army in September at home. Like, what I'm saying is, to me, Oklahoma progresses under Lincoln Riley as the season goes on. I think that's the normal thing to do. Realistically, I'm not going to look like an idiot and go back on my prediction from a week ago. Stanford 43, SC. Stanford 45, SC 43. Again, no football reason, and any other thing, I'm picking SC to win here.
See,
I'm locked in. I can't go back and look like an.
You're overthinking it. You're trying to make yourself not look like an idiot by making a pick that makes you look like an idiot.
No, I get that. I'm aware of that.
As others have pointed out in the chat, I get where you're coming from, but there's a huge but here. That Nebraska game, the West Virginia game, the games early on in the season where they struggled against
They didn't have a set quarterback.
Caleb Williams was not playing. He did not
100%.
play in those games. Caleb Williams' losses. And Kansas State, another 6-point win. Only one pass for Caleb Williams.
Yeah.
Caleb Williams' losses in 2021 were to number 5 Baylor on the road and to number 7 Oklahoma State on the road.
Yeah.
So I think it's a whole...
Baylor was 13 at the time, but yes.
Yeah. I think it is a whole new ball game with Caleb Williams.
I agree.
I think he's different. I think he's built different, and I just don't see Stanford being able to put up 45 points. I just don't see it.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, I agree. You know this. Yeah. So, all right. I made my bed and I'm sleeping.
You very much, yes.
All right, let's go to the mailbag and get all of your questions. We got an email from John. You want to read it, Alicia?
Yeah. Hi, Alicia and Michael. I read Evan Desai's piece on top 2 USC football players, Jordan Addison and Tuli Tuipulotu, getting NIL car deals. I wondered about the tax implications and ran across this insightful article. In it, they use this example that seems familiar. Quote, Katie Davis is a CPA and partner in James Moore & Co., a Gainesville, Florida-based firm that offers tax consulting, 401k auditing, and HR services. As a hypothetical, Davis applied the IRS annual lease value table to estimate for on 3 the total tax due for someone who's a California resident who attends school and earns non-resident income sourced in Ohio, who drives for the entire calendar year a car valued at $200,000, whose services aren't sourced to another state, who hasn't earned any other taxable income, and who has no deductions. That was a whole sentence. Sorry. This is an extremely specific hypothetical scenario where an individual's only taxable compensation is the use of a luxury vehicle. The total tax due would be roughly $13,000, Davis said, after doing some back-of-the-napkin math. So have you heard if USC players are getting good tax advice from the athletic department or Boulevard? Do you think players will get into big IRS troubles if they haven't put aside sufficient money to cover their NIL-related federal and state income taxes? Thoughts? Fight on, John in Oakland. Thank you for sending the email, John. I think this is an interesting case. I would be very surprised if Boulevard, what do we call it? An NIL sort of a collective plus, whatever they're calling themselves, setting up players with deals, doesn't also take it upon themselves to make sure that players are educated about tax implications. Because the worst thing for Boulevard and for USC at this point would be the first player that gets in tax trouble and then says, F you, USC, you didn't prepare me for this. Like, that should be job number 1. They should have all sorts of educational stuff. They should have all of that worked out for each player, given their specific situation, every time an NIL deal is discussed. So if they aren't doing that, then shame on Boulevard and shame on USC. I wonder if there's some sort of set off, some sort of workaround, some sort of this, that, or the other thing that they're probably trying to do to make sure that tax stuff isn't as harmful there. But yeah. I do not know what those things could be, so we'd need something else. to figure that out.
I don't know. And anytime I see 401k auditing and HR services in a sentence, my eyes start to glaze over.
Yeah.
I assume that this is one of those things that easily could be forgotten about until the end. I also have to imagine that if there's things like collectives and whatnot, the odds probably it ends up that there's enough cash in to cover the taxes. But again, I'm the last person in the world to talk about that.
So Josh Arena in the chat says that the Peristyle podcast has a new episode on today with the folks from Boulevard, and they talk about this very topic. So that's a podcast I'm going to go listen to. And if you, John in Oakland or anyone else, if you're curious, hearing from the Boulevard people directly, I think is the best way to sort of figure out where everything's falling here.
100%. Let's go to a Slack message we got from our friend Darlene, who says, thoughts on the subtle switch of the Fight On decal on the back of the helmet to Cardinal and gold instead of white and Cardinal. I didn't notice it for practice before the game, and also don't see people mad at it for once, which is refreshing. Alicia, did you see the picture of this? I
saw the picture, which surprised me because I did not notice it in the slightest at any point during the game. And normally, I'm pretty I notice uniform things that are different during the game.
Yeah.
I noticed immediately Caleb's sort of sleeves and the way that they sort of looked with him and all the look he was going for, all that kind of stuff. Didn't notice this at all. In the picture, not a huge fan. I don't think it's my favorite look. But like the fact that I didn't notice it during the game means it's not that big of a deal. So
probably yes. Yeah. It's one of those things. It's like the collar of the road collar.
Yeah.
I don't care for it. Not my thing. But it's fine. Like if that's what's going to be the difference, then whatever. Like it could be so much worse. This is in that category for me. I don't like it. I don't think it looks that great. But like whatever. This isn't a hill to die on. Not a big deal. Shrug.
Yeah. But thank you for the message, Darlene.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go rapid fire on the YouTube questions and then we'll wrap this thing up. Josh says, Ryan Abraham, the Peristyle podcast, says the quote, Stanford is but. What say you? Is he high for all of his food analogies or maybe is he onto something? I mean, Alicia, you had a similar thing to say about Stanford in this game, in this pod.
They're doo-doo sauce. The thing here, though, is that Stanford can be Stanford can be doo-doo sauce, and they can still beat USC in a very sort of specific scenario that is within the realm of possibility, even if it isn't the most likely. So,
yeah. Donnell Smith says, question, if Lincoln Riley was still coaching Oklahoma and they played Stanford, would you still pick Stanford to win? No, because to me, this is all situational based. And if Lincoln Riley was still at Oklahoma, he'd be in year 6 at Oklahoma? And Stanford doesn't do these things out of conference. So no, I wouldn't pick Stanford because there'd be no reason to. Stanford ends up winning these weird out of conference games because I think David Shaw puts a hell of a lot of weight into winning the conference over anything nationally. And B, this is the second game, the first conference game under Lincoln Riley with a roster that has 1 billion new players on it. If you're going to come out and struggle, it's going to be a game like this rather than a game in year 6 or 7 or whatever it was of him at Oklahoma.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I would agree that I wouldn't be talking about, I would be very much more confident in Oklahoma beating Stanford under those circumstances than I am about USC beating Stanford. And I'm at this point pretty confident.
You're pretty confident. Yeah. Alex says, what do you think Stanford for their role in USC hiring Lincoln Riley? What am I missing there?
So Stanford destroyed USC at the Coliseum last year. USC fired Helton.
Yes. Okay.
I won't give Stanford too much credit for that because I think Helton was not long for this world as a coach at USC. And I think that Lincoln Riley was clearly the target. So whether they hired Helton in week 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 9, I think that USC still ends up with Lincoln Riley.
This is a conversation for another day, but I'm to the point where I don't think that firing Clay Helton in week 2 mattered.
It didn't.
Because I think Clay was always going to get fired last year, no matter what happened.
Yeah.
But on top of that, I don't think that getting the head start to work on Lincoln Riley, I don't know that ultimately mattered. I mean, maybe.
I guess how willing were they to get the start on Lincoln Riley?
I guess what I'm saying
when
is
Helton was still the coach.
I think that they could have still gotten Lincoln Riley if they would have fired him after the Notre Dame game.
Like if they fire Helton on a Thursday or on a Monday, and then that Sunday, the next Sunday, 6 days later, got Lincoln Riley. Like, I think that's possible. But I think they clearly had to do groundwork. And the question would be, how willing were they to do groundwork when Helton was still employed? That's my only question, but we don't have that answer because we can't speak to the people. That everyone involved in that would tell you that there was no groundwork done. So,
right.
Let's
go to a question from Richard. For years, we consistently thought this is the year Stanford will inevitably slip up and reveal that Shaw is mediocre. And season after season, that didn't happen. And I think that sort of conditioned us into thinking Stanford will exceed expectations and Shaw is great. But now it's pretty clear that they have sustained a downturn. At what point does Stanford move on from David Shaw? Would have been unthinkable years ago.
This is a tough question because I think that Stanford could ride David Shaw until he no longer wants. Like, I've always thought that David Shaw would retire before Stanford fired him, or David Shaw would decide to leave before Stanford fired him. So I think it would take some really, really significantly like 0-win seasons multiple years in a row for Stanford to move on. I think the cultural fit between David Shaw and Stanford is so strong. It's just hard to imagine.
Yeah, so they haven't gone to a bowl game in each of the last 3 seasons. I think what it would take is back to like 2 or 3 really bad seasons, and we haven't seen that yet. Because I think that David Shaw could ride this thing out forever. 2019 he was 4-8. 2020 the COVID season he was 4-2. Well, that's more than good enough in the COVID season. That's good, right? It's a winning record, 4-2. Last year 3-9. So if he comes back this year and is 6-6, then
they're happy.
I think they're fine. He resets everything.
He needs like an 8-win season every 3 or 4 years, and I do not think they will fire him.
Yes, because we have to understand the overall expectations for what Stanford football is. And I think it's going to a bowl game every other year and winning a Pac-12 championship once every 15.
Yeah.
And David Shaw, I think, can get you that no matter what.
I mean, I guess the question is there any point at which Stanford feels like they can upgrade on David Shaw? And I'm not sure that Stanford ever comes to the answer that they can.
Yeah, 100%. Last question comes from Josh. Since Stanford played Colgate, do you think the Farm will be as fully prepared to face this SC squad like they would have if they played a P5 team in week 1?
I mean, I guess there's a reality where they are overconfident having blown out Colgate, but there's also my firm belief that they have spent the last, like you said, 9 months preparing for USC. So did they even need to play a Power 5 team?
Yeah, I don't know. I think they are putting all their eggs in the basket of this game, just like we've seen them do year after year. Even when they played Northwestern, what was it last year? They played Northwestern, or 2 years, whenever it was.
Yeah,
and they, it's always this is the one that David Shaw prepares for. So we will see it Saturday night, 4:30 p.m. Over on the ABC. Kirk Herbstreit and Chris Fowler on the call. The big team from ABC. So that's exciting. USC and Stanford. And then right after the game, we'll be over here on the YouTube with a live CarCast giving you our thoughts after the game USC and Stanford. So until then, as always, you can follow us on Twitter. Alicia on Twitter is at Penguin of Troy. I'm at Michael Cast FS. Yeah, that's right. And you can follow the show on Twitter at Reign of Troy. On Twitter, facebook.com/Reign of Troy. Email address, reignoftroy@fanside.com. Last little note meant to mention, our phone number is offline. And
Yeah.
we've had a mishap, and we're trying to get it back online. So before we tell you a new phone number, we're just not going to say the phone number for right now.
Yeah.
We're trying to get that online, and hopefully we can get it online by game day, and then be able to tweet it out on socials.
We'll either have the old phone number back, or we will have to share a new phone number with you.
Yes.
And Michael and I will be very, very sad about that because we like that phone number.
Yes.
But we'll have to figure that out.
Yeah. So until then, see ya.
See ya.
See ya.